Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the 7 days of Halloween here at Books and Culture. It's great to have you. Today we're going to read another short story. Hello. I would like to draw your attention to one thing first. The registration for the online course, the Creative Reader Academy, an introduction to literary studies, is open until tomorrow. So if you want to join this group that will explore reading skills and read literature in context and have a lot of fun discussing different texts and authors, you should go to booksandculture.club, check out the website. You can also see the link in my bio. Hello, Edu. Hello, Amy. How are you doing today? Hello. And today we are going to travel. You know that literature is a time machine and also a travel machine, right? Reading books, you can travel to different periods of time and space, imagined worlds. So in our first session, we read The Landlady by Roald Dahl. So we read British literature. Yesterday, we read The Shoemaker and the Devil by Anton Chekhov. So we traveled to 19th century Russia. And today we are going to travel to 19th century France, and we're going to read the short story The Apparition by Guy de Maupassant. And I have to warn you, this is a creepy one. Hello, Martina. Hello, Edu. Nice that you're joining us. Are you ready for this spooky story? But first, of course, let's place the text into its context. So you're probably familiar with Guy de Maupassant. He's one of the most famous French authors. He's a big name in French realism, 19th century French literature. He was born in 1850 and he died in 1893. And he's considered to be the master of the short story form in French literature. So there's a lot of good stuff to read written by him. And as I mentioned, he's a big name in 19th century French realism, especially one branch of realism called naturalism, in which, in his short stories are represented human lives, destinies, and social forces in disillusioned and pessimistic terms. That's one of the main characteristics of naturalism. And his fiction also includes a lot of social criticism. There is one specific short story, that was the first story that I read written by him, called Boule de Suif in French. The English translation would be The Dumpling. Published in 1880. It was his first published story, and it's considered to be his masterpiece. And he does a lot of social criticism there. But our story today is quite different. We're going to read one of his, don't want to say anything, don't want to spoil it. Let's say one of his fantastic short stories, so fantastic literature with supernatural elements. The Apparition was first published in the magazine Le Gaulois on 4th April 1883. And in this stories of fantastic literature, he's written quite a lot. He explores the possibility of the supernatural and the theme of mental instability. That's a typical characteristic of late 19th century Gothic, right? I recorded one of the modules today about one lesson for the Creative Reader Academy about the Gothic. And that's indeed this idea of the double and mental instability as a source of terror, late 19th century Gothic. Okay, are you ready to start The Apparition by Guy de Maupassant? You can find this text online and you can read along with me. So let's get started. It all starts, a lot of stories like this, in this style of fantasy short stories. They start with a reunion of some kind and people are telling ghost stories, right? That's the story we're reading today. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James comes to my mind. So let's get started. The Apparition. The subject of sequestration of the person came up in speaking of a recent lawsuit, and each of us had a story to tell. A true story, he said. We had been spending the evening together at an old family mansion in the Rue des Grenelles, just a party of intimate friends. The old Marquis de la Tour Samuel, who was 82, rose and leaning his elbow on the mantelpiece, said in his somewhat shaky voice, I also know of something strange, so strange that it has haunted me all my life. It is now 56 years since the incident occurred, and yet not a month passes that I do not see it again in a dream. So great is the impression of fear it has left on my mind. For 10 minutes, I experienced such horrible fright that ever since then, a sort of constant terror has remained with me. Sudden noises startle me violently, and objects imperfectly distinguished at night inspire me with a mad desire to flee from them. In short, I am afraid of the dark. But I would not have acknowledged that before I reached my present age. Now I can say anything. I have never receded before real danger, ladies. It is therefore permissible at 82 years of age not to be brave in presence of imaginary danger. That affair so completely upset me, caused me such deep and mysterious and terrible distress that I never spoke of it to anyone. I will now tell it to you exactly as it happened, without any attempt at explanation. In July 1827, I was stationed at Rouen. One day, as I was walking along the quay, I met a man whom I thought I recognized without being able to recall exactly who he was. Instinctively, I made a movement to stop. The stranger perceived it and at once extended his hand. He was a friend to whom I had been deeply attached as a youth. For 5 years, I had not seen him. He seemed to have aged half a century. His hair was quite white, and he walked bent over as though completely exhausted. He apparently understood my surprise, and he told me of his misfortune which had shattered his life. So this is the beginning of the story. It's told, it starts with this reunion of friends at this old mansion, and an old man, 82 years old. 82 years old, says that he has a story to tell, something that has haunted him all these 60-something years, 56 years, and there is not a day in his life that he does not think of this instance that made him afraid of the dark, afraid of all things moving in the dark. And now that he's 82, he feels like it's safe for him to admit that. He would not have admitted that in his young age, but now he can say that. So he starts his own tale in first-person narrative. So the tale within the tale, right? The story within the story. It's called a framed narrative. And so he was young, that was in 1827, and he met an old friend on the street he hadn't seen for a long time. And that friend looked so old that he had aged so much. And then his friend is going to tell him what misfortune befell him. So let's see what happened to the friend. Do you see the expectation, the dark mood that Maupassant is creating here? like something that has not left this man's mind for 56 years because it haunted him so. All right. So now the friend is going to explain his story. Having fallen madly in love with a young girl, he, the friend, had married her, but after a year of more than earthly happiness, she died suddenly of an affection of the heart. He left his country home on the very day of her burial and came to his town house in Rouen, where he lived, alone and unhappy, so sad and wretched that he thought constantly of suicide. Since I have found you again in this manner, he said, I will ask you to render me an important service. It is to go and get me out of the desk in my bedroom, our bedroom, some papers of which I have urgent need. I cannot send a servant or a business clerk, as discretion and absolute silence are necessary. As for myself, nothing on earth would induce me to re-enter that house. I will give you the key of the room, which I myself locked on leaving, and the key of my desk. Also a few words for my gardener, telling him to open that chateau for you. But come and breakfast with me tomorrow, and we'll arrange all that. I promised to do him the slight favor he asked. It was, for that matter, only a ride which I could make in an hour on horseback, his property being but a few miles distant from Rouen. At 10 o'clock the following day, I breakfasted tete-a-tete with my friend, but he scarcely spoke. He begged me to pardon him. The thought of the visit I was about to make to that room, the scene of his dead happiness, overcame him, he said. He indeed seemed singularly agitated and preoccupied, as though undergoing some mysterious mental struggle. At length he explained to me exactly what I had to do. It was very simple. I must take 2 packages of letters and a roll of papers from the first right-hand drawer of the desk, of which I had the key. He added, I need not beg you to refrain from glancing at them. I was wounded at that remark and told him so somewhat sharply. He stammered, Forgive me, I suffer so, and tears came to his eyes. At about 1 o'clock, I took leave of him to accomplish my mission. So you see what's happening here? So he met this old friend of his that looked wretched because his wife had just died. And he was feeling so sad and miserable that he did not have the energy to go back to the house where both of them lived together. So he asks this friend, the narrator of the story, to go there to the house, to the desk, and get some papers, some letters from the drawer. But he warns him not to look at papers because discretion and silence is required. Hello, the story's here. Hello, Sophie. Nice to see you here. So now let's see. He goes on his mission. Let's see what happens to him. The weather was glorious, and I trotted across the fields, listening to the song of the larks and the rhythmical clang of my sword against my boot. You can tell it's the 19th century, right? He's going by on horseback and he's carrying a sword. Then I entered the forest and walked my horse. Branches of trees caressed my face as I passed, and now and then I caught a leaf with my teeth and chewed it, from sheer gladness of heart at being alive and vigorous on such a radiant day. As I approached the chateau, I took from my pocket the letter I had for the gardener, and was astonished at finding it sealed. I was so irritated that I was about to turn back without having fulfilled my promise, but reflected that I should thereby display undue susceptibility. My friend, in his troubled condition, might easily have fastened the envelope without noticing that he did so. The manor looked as if it had been abandoned for 20 years. The open gate was falling from its hinges. The walks were overgrown with grass, and the flower beds were no longer distinguishable. The noise I made by kicking at a shutter brought out an old man from a side door. He seemed stunned with astonishment at seeing me. On receiving my letter, he read it, reread it, turned it over and over, looked me up and down, put the paper in his pocket, and finally said, "Well, what is it you wish?" I replied shortly, "You ought to know, since you have just read your master's orders. I wish to enter the chateau." He seemed overcome. "Then you are going into her room?" I began to lose patience. "Damn it, are you presuming to question me?" He stammered in confusion. "No, sir, but it has not been opened since the death. If you will be kind enough to wait 5 minutes, I will go and see if—" I interrupted him angrily. "See here, what do you mean by your tricks?" "You know very well you cannot enter the room, since here is the key." He no longer objected. "Then, sir, I will show you the way. Show me the staircase and leave me. I'll find my way without you." "But, sir, indeed." This time I lost patience, and pushing him aside, went into the house. I first went through the kitchen, then 2 rooms occupied by this man and his wife. I then crossed a large hall, mounted a staircase, and recognized the door described by my friend. I easily opened it and entered the apartment. It was so dark that at first I could distinguish nothing. I stopped short, disagreeably affected by that disagreeable, musty odor of closed, unoccupied rooms. As my eyes slowly became accustomed to the darkness, I saw plainly enough a large and disordered bedroom, the bed without sheets, but still retaining its mattresses and pillows, on one of which was a deep impression, as though an elbow or a head had recently rested there. The chairs all seemed out of place. I noticed that a door, doubtless that of a closet, had remained half open. I first went to the window, which I opened to let in the light, but the fastenings of the shutters had grown so rusty that I could not move them. I even tried to break them with my sword, but without success. As I was growing irritated over my useless efforts and could now see fairly well in the semi-darkness, I gave up the hope of getting more light and went over to the writing desk. What do you think of the story so far? So our narrator within the story, telling this experience he had in the past that has haunted him ever since, how he came to this chateau, how the gardener was shocked to know that someone would dare enter the room that had been closed since the death had occurred. It was so dark inside, the shutters were rusty, so he could not open it, so there was like almost no light. He could barely see the things inside the bedroom, but what he could see was that things were out of order and very creepily. It seemed like, well, the bed, there was, it seemed as if someone had rested an elbow or a head on the pillow recently, because there was a mark on the pillow. Let's continue. Let me know what you think in the comments. I love to know what you feel. So let's see what happens to this protagonist. I seated myself in an armchair and, letting down the lid of the desk, I opened the drawer designated. It was full to the top. I needed but 3 packages, which I knew how to recognize, and began searching for them. I was straining my eyes in the effort to read the superscriptions when I seemed to hear, or rather feel, something rustle back of me. I paid no attention, believing that a draught from the window was moving some drapery. But in a minute or so, another movement, almost imperceptible, sent a strangely disagreeable little shiver over my skin. It was so stupid to be affected, even slightly, that self-respect prevented my turning around. I had just found the second package I needed and was about to lay my hand on the third when a long and painful sigh, uttered just at my shoulder, made me bound like a madman from my seat and land several feet off. As I jumped, I had turned round my hand on the hilt of my sword, and truly, if I had not felt it at my side, I should have taken to my heels like a coward. A tall woman, dressed in white, stood gazing at me from the back of the chair where I had been sitting an instant before. Such a shudder ran through all my limbs that I nearly fell backwards. No one who has not experienced it can understand that frightful, unreasoning terror. The mind becomes vague, the heart ceases to beat, the entire body grows as limp as a sponge. I do not believe in ghosts. Nevertheless, I collapsed from a hideous dread of the dead, and I suffered in a few moments more than in all the rest of my life from the irresistible terror of the supernatural. If she had not spoken, I should have died perhaps, but she spoke. She spoke in a sweet, sad voice that set my nerves vibrating. I dare not say that I became master of myself and recovered my reason. No, I was terrified and scarcely knew what I was doing. But a certain innate pride, a remnant of soldierly instinct, made me, almost in spite of myself, maintain a bold front. She said, "Oh, sir, you can render me a great service." I wanted to reply, but it was impossible for me to pronounce a word. Only a vague sound came from my throat. She continued, "Will you? You can save me, cure me. I suffer frightfully. I suffer, oh, how I suffer." And she slowly seated herself in my armchair, still looking at me. "Will you?" she said. I nodded in assent, my voice still being paralyzed. Then she held out to me a tortoise shell comb and murmured, "Comb my hair. Oh, comb my hair, that will cure me. It must be combed. Look at my head, how I suffer, and my hair pulls so." Her hair, unbound, very long and very black, it seemed to me, hung over the back of the armchair and touched the floor. Why did I promise? Why did I take that comb with a shudder, and why did I hold in my hands her long black hair that gave my skin a frightful cold sensation, as though I were handling snakes? I cannot tell. The sensation has remained in my fingers, and I still tremble in recalling it. I combed her hair. I handled, I know not how, those icy locks. I twisted, knotted, and unknotted, and braided them. She sighed, bowed her head, seemed happy. Suddenly she said, "Thank you," snatched the comb from my hands, and fled by the door that I had noticed ajar. Left alone, I experienced for several seconds the horrible agitation of one who awakens from a nightmare. At length I regained my senses. I ran to the window and with a mighty effort burst open the shutters, letting a flood of light into the room. Immediately I sprang to the door by which that being had departed. I found it closed and immovable. Then the mad desire to flee overcame me like a panic, the panic which soldiers know in battle. I seized the 3 packets of letters on the open desk, ran from the room, dashed down the stairs 4 steps at a time, found myself outside, I know not how, and perceiving my horse a few steps off, leaped into the saddle and galloped away. So you see what happened here. What a creepy scene Maupassant has created. So this man goes into the room where this woman recently died, a room that had been closed, and he was looking at the drawers to get the packages for his friend, and he not heard, more like felt a presence on his back. But he had self-respect, so he didn't bother turning, it was just a fancy of his mind. But then he heard a sigh right next to him, and that made him jump. And as he looked around, he saw a woman dressed in white with long black hair. And this woman speaks. She asks for help. She says that her hair is pulling, that her hair is knotted. She needs help combing her hair. So she gives him a comb, and he is paralyzed with fear, but he doesn't know what to do. He simply assents and combs her hair, unknots the hair, braids her hair. And the woman feels relieved. She's happy. She says, "Thank you," and disappears through a closet. The door was ajar. He's paralyzed after this moment, as if when you awaken from a nightmare. I think that Maupassant describes this paralyzing, icy feeling of fear really well. And he bursts open the curtains, the light goes in. Remember before the shutters were stuck. And the light comes in, and he tries to open the door where that woman just entered, but it's locked. So he just panics, he leaves, he goes, gets on his horse, and he gallops away. So let's see how this story ends. How do you feel about that? That's creepy, right? That's a good Halloween story. I stopped only when I reached Rouen and alighted at my lodgings. Throwing the reins to my orderly, I fled to my room and shut myself in to reflect. For an hour, I anxiously asked myself if I were not the victim of a hallucination. Undoubtedly, I had had one of those incomprehensible nervous attacks, those exaltations of mind that give rise to visions and are the stronghold of the supernatural. And I was about to believe I had seen a vision, had a hallucination, when, as I approached the window, my eyes fell by chance upon my breast. My military cape was covered with long black hairs. One by one, with trembling fingers, I plucked them off and threw them away. I then called my orderly. I was too disturbed, too upset to go and see my friend that day, and I also wished to reflect more fully upon what I ought to tell him. I sent him his letters, for which he gave the soldier a receipt. He asked after me most particularly, and on being told I was ill, had had a sunstroke, appeared exceedingly anxious. Next morning, I went to him, determined to tell him the truth. He had gone out the evening before and had not yet returned. I called again during the day. My friend was still absent. After waiting a week longer without news of him, I notified the authorities and a judicial search was instituted. Not the slightest trace of his whereabouts or manner of disappearance was discovered. A minute inspection of the abandoned chateau revealed nothing of a suspicious character. There was no indication that a woman had been concealed there. After fruitless researches, all further efforts were abandoned, and for 56 years I have heard nothing. I know no more than before. And that's how the story ends. My book lover friends, what did you think of Maupassant's story, The Apparition? I really like the atmosphere that he creates, the mood that he creates here. It's very spooky. And the contrasting feelings of the narrator. So trying to explain things rationally as he experiences this supernatural occurrence, but at a certain point he just cannot explain this. He sees hairs on his twisted around his button. So how could that be possible if the woman had not been real? But there was no one in the chateau, and that friend just disappeared. So that's a good example of a story that keeps more or less the ambiguity of this supernatural event, and you could kind of explain it both ways in a similar manner as The Shoemaker and the Devil that we read yesterday. But I hope you enjoyed this story. Also one of my favorite scary stories. It's I've seen it usually in anthologies of fantastic literature or ghost stories. You'll find it in anthologies like that. So I have two things to tell you before we finish this live. One is to remind you one more time of the registration for my online course, An Introduction to Literary Studies. The doors are closing tomorrow, so you have one more day to sign up. If you have any questions about the course, send me a direct message. I would love to talk to you about it and to answer all your questions. And second thing is that tomorrow we are going to read our fourth story, and we're going to read one of the masters of suspense and a big name in American Gothic. That is, of course, Edgar Allan Poe. We're going to read The Cask of Amontillado. Love that story. But tomorrow we're going to meet a little bit earlier. So instead of 7:00 p.m. Central European summertime, we are going to meet at 6:30 p.m. So at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow, I'll be here to talk to you and read to you The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.